I guess I'll start. I'm Bob Cohen. I'm a partner here in the New York offices of McDermott, Will & Emery. I'm a corporate securities attorney. I do a lot of early stage life science companies. I've been doing it for 40 years. And we'll try to address term sheet issues. I think we're focused a little bit on equity, but we'll talk about equity and rewards and things like that. We'll be open to talk about things. Joe's my partner. He's out of the Boston office.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bob. I focus heavily on executive compensation and employee benefits. Been focusing on equity awards and phantom equity for life sciences companies for about the last 13 years. So, yeah, I think I speak for all of us when I say that to the extent we can make this a conversation here about the kind of issues you guys are going through, what you're thinking about, that'll make this a lot more fun.
And he's apparently much younger than mine.
Well, Balders.
And we have Jim here.
Yeah, my name is Jim Iverson. I'm CEO of Senjam Pharmaceutical. We are focused in the pain space. We have 7 assets under development, and throughout my career, I've used equity or incentive equity for compensation as well as phantom stock. So I can speak to both of those areas.
I mean, we can go talk generally, or you can answer questions from there if you want to have more specific questions. I mean, I think, Joe, you can talk about how, I guess, following up what Jim said, how equity is used for early stage companies to bring on, compensation. People when you don't have the cash to actually do it.
Yeah, I guess as an initial question, how many of the folks here have their entities or thinking about structuring their entities as corporations rather than partnerships? Okay, so about equal. I mean, there are kind of few different basic flavors of equity for corporations. There are stock options and restricted stock are 2 of the more commonly used types of equity. One thing that is very nice if you are a super early stage company and you don't have, your stock isn't really worth that much, or if you're an LLC, your units aren't worth that much, is that you can give out this equity and have people make a special kind of election on it, which is called an 83B election for that section of the tax code. And basically they'll pay some usually very small amount of income tax when they get the equity. And then after that, they won't have to pay tax again until they sell it, and it'll all be capital gains tax. So that's a fairly, it's a fairly commonly used method of structuring equity. A lot of folks love stock options. Everybody's heard of stock options. They're kind of sexier. I mean, in people's minds. I actually am not quite as big a fan of them generally, and that's largely because it's hard to get the tax benefits that you would like, that people imagine they have in an early stage company. And the reason for that is that when you have a non-public company, you're generally going to kick off, you have to pay the exercise price when you exercise them, and most of the time you're going to kick off ordinary income when they're exercised, unless you structure them in a certain way. So realistically, very few people actually exercise until there's a liquidity event anyway. And it's very hard to capture a lot of the upside that people imagine that they have when nobody's exercising them until there's a liquidity event. I don't know, Jim, if you want to speak a little bit to your experience with that as well.
Yeah, so when we issued commitments to equity before we formed the company, and for our advisors as well as our scientific advisors, we came up with kind of a hypothetical valuation, and then as well as some key resources of ours. We paid some cash compensation, and then we gave some in equity and units in the LLC. And then we formed the company in August of 2017. We converted, or I made good on all the commitments that were made, and we gave the equity or the units out with a zero basis associated with it. So it was founder's stock. There was two classes of stock. There was, from an LLC perspective, there was profit, there was a capital contribution and then a profit contribution, but we gave it at a zero basis. And as Joe mentioned, everyone signed 83B election with 100% vested. So the clock starts ticking for them when they receive that. So if there was a monetizing event, if 12 months later, it would get capital gains treatment.
Can you put a schedule on the 83B election?
Yes, you can.
Because that's, I mean, we were in a similar situation. So we want to compensate, we're founders, and we want to compensate some key employees before we go into into an A round. And so can we just give them, I mean, our founders' equity on a schedule, and that would be considered, basically, it's founder shareholding, so you get the 1202 tax exemption, plus the basis would be zero or very small. But
Yeah, these guys could probably speak to the tax side of it, but on the 83B election, you can put a strike price on there, and then there could be a vesting schedule as well.
yeah, I want to keep them around. I mean, we give them equity, and then they decide they're gone, so I want to stay around, and we're going to give them equity, obviously, that's why there's a vesting schedule, so. But I don't know whether you could, obviously, as you vest, the equity's going to be of different values, so does that cause a tax issue?
Well, if you have not filed an 83B election on those grants, then every time there's a vesting,
Right.
that ordinary.
So can you file an 83B election with a vesting schedule?
Oh, yeah, and in fact, yeah, I mean, to some extent, if you don't have a vesting schedule, if you just give somebody 100
Yeah.
shares,
Yeah.
then you don't have any choice. It's the same thing as giving them that value in cash. The 83B is, well, election, so you can choose when you want to report income with unvested equity.
Great.
Yeah, sure.
So how late is too late for 83B? So we're at a point where we haven't taken any external investor money, but we're probably worth a tiny chunk of change already because we basically self-funded. And we haven't yet formally issued this stuff. And
Yeah.
how late is too late?
So for the recipient, they have up to 30 days to file an 83B election. Since you haven't formally issued this, we don't need to get into it. There is a convoluted way around the 30-day limit. But anyway, the bottom line is, from the perspective of your recipients, if you haven't granted anything, you should be fine. I mean, I assume no.
But the 83B election, at that time of the election, given that you said that there's some real value in this company, they'll recognize
Right, that's a good point.
the value of what that is today, okay? It's not as though you get zero today and see
Yeah.
later on. I mean, the other ways to do it is, again, you can do somewhat out of the money options, give them a larger number, right, to compensate for the value, and if it's a large enough discount, the value is kind of minimal, right? So that's one way to look. But, I mean, typically, you're talking about, if you're talking about a grant to stock for an early stage company, it's not really material one way or the other. I think, the value, right? There's a value it's later on, and that's why options tend to come in better than grants of stock later on. Restricted stock grants too,
So
or
it's a-
vested stock and things like that.
Yeah.
But I get two messages here.
Okay.
I get grants and I get 83B and I get options.
Well, it depends on
Yeah.
the stage of the company.
Depends what, so.
I mean, if you're a startup
Let's say
company,
right,
you
no
can,
money in.
You have virtually no value.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean,
Yeah, then.
depends who you're talking to. But,
it really depends on the stage that the
Yeah.
company is.
Yeah, I mean, if you are, let me put it this way, if you had third-party valuation company come in and put a value on your equity, that's pretty much what you would want to look to do to establish what the per share, or per unit, whatever value is. So if they were to come in and say, each of these is worth 1/100th of a penny, then you would probably be you might very likely be in 83B land.
Yeah, we're doing a third-party evaluation for our A round, it's gonna have a number on it, so then that's discoverable, so then options would probably be a better strategy, right?
Well, I want to get the grants before that happens. You're saying you haven't established, have you taken outside money before?
No.
Okay, so, you know,
So even though we
objectively,
have
you
done
want to
some-
opt, before you get any other third party coming in and some kind of evaluation, you want to grant these things as soon as possible, discount
Yeah.
rate. You may never get that financing, so that's not really a real number
Yeah,
at the
no,
time of the grant.
that's exactly what we're thinking about right now, so I don't know if it's grant or, you know, A3B or is it options, but we're gonna
Well,
have
it
an
dep-
evaluation that
yeah.
comes up with a serious
Exactly.
number, so does that, you know, that's relevant, I think, if.
Sure, I mean, if you come
Question,
back and
right?
somebody says to you that these shares, which have no market value, nobody else has bought into them, that are highly, they're non-transferable, there's no market for them, I mean, the value's gonna go pretty low, right? But even if it does come in high, $100,000, $200,000, well, you're not gonna, you're not gonna wanna make an 83B election because unless you're paying this guy a lot of money, he's gonna have to pay $50,000 in taxes on $100,000. So you give him some options, maybe above the value, if it's $1 share, give him $1 more. I don't have the valuations to it, but typically, the shorter, the Black-Scholes method, the shorter the period of vesting, if you make it a 5-year option with a 25% premium, you're not going to have a lot of value in those options. To make an A3B election with respect to those options, it won't be
Well,
worth it.
yeah, you actually can't, on the options.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would only be on the restricted stock that you could do the 83B. So if you were, if the bottom line is, if you're transferring these shares of restricted stock to someone and, you're looking at, they're gonna have like a real value on the day of transfer, someone's gonna be much less likely to file an 83B election, right? I mean, with options, since there is no 83B election option, you're just not gonna, there's no choice of whether or not to recognize income then.
So why are they gonna be less likely to file an 83B, because of the question, I mean,
Because the value, the cost.
If you have restricted stock that has that's worth like $100,000 on a day
Yeah.
of grant, it's a big, it's
You have
just
to
a
pay
big.
taxes.
Yeah.
That's
no,
all.
I get that, but they're not probably gonna want the stock, they're gonna want options, right?
They're going to want options.
Well, if they
Nobody
want-
wants to pay. First of all, it's an illiquid security. It may be worthless. Once you make that, you lose it. You can't recover the deduction, right?
That's right.
You lose the deduction. You took the $50,000 tax hit. You get no benefit. The company goes out of business. You lost $50,000.
Yeah.
That's not really where you want to be. When you're on the
Yeah,
station.
that's good.
All right.
Let me just mention one thing, before we answer some of the questions. Also, as you go into your Series A, something that I've recommended and we did was we created an option pool. And often when speaking to investors, they're not going to put money in and then say, hey, we want to create an option pool after that dilutes them. So we right out of the gate,
Yeah, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah,
It's
we
part of the
now,
research.
we allocated a number of shares. We don't have a defined option plan yet. We plan on doing that, creating that with our lawyers. But we do have the shares allocated,
Yeah.
so that it'll be non-dilutive to.
Yeah, that's how, if you're going to do a financing with anybody, you want to make sure that you have the plan or the reservation of shares up front. A sufficient number to bring on new people to, right? And carve outs for like consultants and,
Yeah.
CEOs and other people who you don't even contemplate today, right? So. yeah.
No, I was just gonna say to, sorry,
10%.
Yeah,
10% 's pretty much
10 to 15. Yeah, I've seen 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you alluded to something a little on that, which is using out of the money options comes with a significant negative impact to it. And you said nobody exercises their options. It's hard to catch at the outside. Could you elaborate on that a bit, please?
Oh, just the reason very few people exercise options before there's a liquidity event, because, it's two things. One, you have the exercise price to pay, and, was there
Right, so
more?
what's the downside of that?
What's the downside of
You're
grant?
just locked into the liquidity event, but that you're kind of locked into anyway, because there's no,
Yeah, so with restricted shares, right, let's say you do the 83B election. What that does is it starts the long-term capital gains holding period, which means if you file the 83B election the day of grant, and there's a liquidity event a year and a day or more later, then when you turn around and sell those shares, they're no longer, they're just, you're gonna report capital gains, long-term capital
It's
gains.
great between which you're.
Yeah, so that's really nice, right? Because it's a much lower rate. It's 20, for most people, it's going to be 23.8% versus 37%. It's a pretty substantial differential. With options, if you're going to incur a tax event and have to pay the exercise price prior to having any liquidity, most people are going to say, well, I'm not going to do that. I mean, you know, I don't know if this company's ever going to sell. Who knows? Maybe it goes bust, and that'll be out this tax, you know, this tax in the exercise price. So what realistically happens, 97 times out of 100, is liquidity event and in the purchase agreement or merger agreement or what have you, options are just cashed out. So they just cashed out for the spread, and that's just cash. That's just ordinary income. So I guess my thought is everybody loves the idea of options because everybody knows about them, and it's like you know, you can tell your friends at a cocktail reception, I have options and blah 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 blah, and everybody knows what that means. But when you really come down to it, I think options are very much overused for early stage companies.
There's a counter argument to that, which is that very often if you lock in your equity stakes very early in the game, you create all manner of problems from the standpoint of sort of
Control.
The incentive structure. And also, you can't predict the future, you can't predict who's going to do what. So there's a lot to be said for locking in your equity stakes very close to your first round of external money, like the final tweaking and so on. So that's why, to your point, at that point, you don't really benefit from the spread as much because, sure, you can do the 83B, but for example, we're probably worth 30 million with no external money in right now. If we did the 83B, you know, we're basically talking real money for people.
Right.
So it's the optionality, so to speak, of the options that makes them valuable from a management standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would, I definitely hear what you're saying. And once you get to real money, you know, restricted stock definitely becomes less appealing. Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe I misunderstood the session. It says term sheet.
Well, the objective here is to talk, I think, about, you know, the compensation equity portion of the term sheet.
Do you
But
want?
we're happy to ask, you have a particular question about term sheets?
Yeah,
I mean,
I was going to ask for Series A, Series B. I'd like to know what kind of, for preferred shareholders, what kind of preferences are in vogue these days? Is participating preferred in vogue, or has that gone out of vogue?
I mean, you know, people ask what's in vogue, you know, and a lot of it has to do with industry, people, the investment group. I think the object of any term sheet, and I was going to say this, you know, term sheets are interesting, right? Because most of the time they don't really anticipate a lot of stuff. You know, I just looked at the term sheet. It wasn't dealing with a preferred A and B series, but it was dealing with actually selling the business. But it's a similar idea about a term sheet. You know, there was, you know, it's a friend of mine who's selling his business, and you know, that you pick up some basic issues, you know, purchase price, and you know, maybe how much is held back, and escrow terms, and some other stuff. But people typically put in the term sheets things that, you know, don't put in term sheets, things that you should put in, like employment issues. You know, this guy's selling his business, they can give him an employment agreement, right? As what? You know, as a group BP. Doesn't say, that's it in the term sheet. Meaningless, okay? You know, there's a buyout of his, you know, they can buy out of, you know, call his remaining shares they kept in the company in the event he's no longer with the company. No provision there is termination of cause, without cause, who makes it. People don't really think through everything, but with respect to what you're saying, it depends. And I can't speak to really whether, you know, what to your issue. But I think what you need to do in term sheet is spell out every single thing. Because at the end of the day, it's non-binding, right? But it prevents you guys from having a misunderstanding and spending a lot of money on attorneys drafting documents that don't reflect what's in your minds. And I see it all the time. You know, you get pretty far down, a term sheet may actually, you know, allow some due diligence, it may provide for, you know, in terms of a letter of intent, which is kind of a variation of a term sheet, you know, right to, you know, to review some, you know, corporate documents, and due diligence, and a non-shop provision and things like that. And, you know, you don't want to do that. You don't want to have a non-shop provision. You don't want to have a due diligence for people when you don't know the real terms. It's not where you want to be. So it's hard to say. I don't know your particular, you know, what your structure is, your Series A, your Series B, what the provisions of your Series A provide for. That's going to provide a lot of control over what you do with the Series B, that's for sure. So, but I think the overarching thought on the term sheet is that people, well, it's okay, we'll figure it out. And, you really need to get these things up front because it's usually a real, when I went through this with this guy, he was like, well, I didn't think of this. Oh, you mean they can buy me out? They're asking for, for a drag along. I don't have a problem with that. Listen, have a tag along, right? You own 40% of the company at the sale. It doesn't matter. So there are a lot of things that you really need to get on the table, all right? Because otherwise, you're just going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time. And God forbid you enter into a non-shop for 60, 90 days, which is, you don't want to do that either, right? And give information about competitors to somebody who's doing a roll-up or something when you know the terms aren't there. And that's, that's where I think it's really the most important part of the term sheet.
Bob, do you think it'd be useful maybe for you to talk a little bit about term sheet basics for the...
Well, again, what term sheet basics, right? Yeah, it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing financing, you're doing an M&A transaction, you're doing, it really depends. But, there's a lot of times people say, and we'll have an employment agreement. You see it all the time. Somebody's acquiring your business, you'll be a party or employment will pay $190,000. It doesn't matter because it's a meaningless thing unless you have a draft employment. The employment agreement should, if not, at least have set forth also the terms of the employment agreement and any ancillary documents, because again, so much is dependent on stuff. In this particular case, just to bring it up because it was from last Thursday, there were so many issues that weren't addressed. And this guy was going to give to a consolidator, contact all his suppliers, all his customer information, give him a 90-day lockup, but he was going to get an employment agreement. And he was going to get dragged along on the transaction. It's like, and he doesn't really know what that means probably, and he's probably embarrassed. So, we went through the litany of things, and you really need to look at it and negotiate now. Don't be afraid of scaring somebody away. Because, the last thing when I said to him, you're going to be tired for 90 days. Plus, your negotiation position with these guys is going to get weaker because they know for 90, you're not an active, auction process because you're giving them 90 days of a non-compete, and you haven't talked about any of these things, and it makes you look like a desperate seller too. It weakens, I think, your hand. So I think that's, it's important to get everything out, understand that this is the best time you're going to get to negotiate these things. You're going to waste a lot of time and money on something. You're going to expose your client, your customers, your suppliers, potentially to this person. You have a confidentiality agreement. Lots of love. You can spend a fortune to prosecute if you have to. So just get it all out. And every single document that you refer to, I think is important. And there'll be an escrow. How much? The formulations. This guy did stupid formulation based on EBITDA. It's not running business anymore. Do it based on the higher of, revenue, multiple revenue or EBITDA, because I'll tell you that probably on every M&A transaction I've done, the biggest source of a conflict at the end after the transaction is over is the earnout. And the earnout's based on, either EBITDA or some other metrics that's determined not by them, because we're not running anymore. Okay, I'm not putting money in, or I'm throwing a ridiculous amount of money into marketing that I wouldn't otherwise do. That's going to kill my EBITDA, right? To build the future, but they have the right to buy me out in 5 years. So you really need to think those things thoroughly through, and not be desperate, because it's not going to help you at the end of the day. Yeah.
So I'm curious at the other end of the spectrum when you have a technology transfer from a random university, licensing or negotiating a term sheet for a potential product. What are some of the terms that really need to be paid close attention to so that that potential startup can actually raise money? So I'm talking
on a university licensed technology, you're saying what, in the license agreement?
Yeah, or even at the term sheet stage, like if a technology transfer office happens to be very greedy and there's for like 30% equity, it's going to make it really hard. So what are some of the things that you have seen that have derailed an entrepreneur raising more money?
Oh, in the future?
Yeah.
Well, the biggest one probably is the royalty. Is twofold. It's minimum, right? Quotas. Even before you decide, before the product's commercialized, you have obligations to meet certain annual quotas, right? So it's not so easy to do that, right? So it also puts you in a bind going forward with other people, right? And the university a little bit. You know, the university doesn't want to license somebody who doesn't have the wherewithal to, obviously, to, you know, to go forward with the product, right? To get it through the trials, et cetera. So, you know, it's really the royalty. It's not the percentage ownership so much university. They don't really care who owns the company, right? They just want to get their equity piece of it, whether it comes from the founders of the university. It doesn't matter so much. In fact, it's probably more desirable to get it from the inventors, right? Because they're the patent holders, right? But it's the obligation to go forward. Obviously, if a royalty that's based 60% on future sales, it's not going to do you a lot, right? You're going to have ridiculous margins to be able to pay that. So.
And when you combine starting equity along with an undiluted clause, is that something that you have seen beyond a certain point?
Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, it's tough. Nobody wants to do that. And you're going to have to waive it anyway. Nobody's going to agree to keep you undiluted as they go forward. It's not going to happen. And no real investor's going to do that. Thank you.
So zooming out, just a question to all three of you, perhaps phrase it a little differently. What are like the top three things that, in terms of investor term sheets, that you wish you knew before you negotiated your first one? And for you guys, I would say, what are the like 2 or 3 things that trip people up first time they do this? We've heard sort of a lot of insights from you, but I'm curious if you had to zoom out and say 2 or 3 things, what are the things to really pay attention to for first time negotiators of investor term sheets?
You know, I'm a big believer in, as Bob was saying, with laying the key terms down in a term sheet is really important. I always feel like when you're negotiating a term sheet, it's, and in my mind, you're setting it up for a definitive agreement. And if you do a good job with your term sheet, the definitive agreement's going to flow well. And so when I think about key terms, if there's warrants that are involved, or if there's, whatever the price is an important element. Anything that's identified, and I feel, and I'm speaking more from an M&A side of things, that everybody's a friend at that point in time. Like everybody, if you got a whiteboard, you said, so what are the key terms of this deal, and you put them down, and you can strike put together a term sheet for a couple pages, but that's going to be the feeder, which is going to take a lot of work, a lot of legal effort, and if there's misunderstanding in that term sheet, it's going to make for a lot of money and a lot of time spent on, like Bob was saying, if there's employment agreements, who are getting the employment agreements? What are those people currently making? What are other perks and benefits they've gotten? If you enter a definitive agreement, you say, well, we're not paying them that amount, we're not giving them that perks. And it's people that are outside the negotiating table, then you got to go back to everybody. So in my mind, setting up the key terms and getting an agreement and the term sheet's not binding, because it's not binding, so it's an easy thing to negotiate, but the definitive agreement is binding. That's the document. The better you do the term sheet, the easier it is to do a definitive agreement.
Well, I think the biggest concern is the reverse of what you're talking about. When you have an investor group coming in, basically debt spiral warrants, right? Anti-dilution provisions that any future financing, their valuation is brought back down to the original, right? And that can be disastrous, right? Particularly in the various parts of that, right? You can have it if it's a certain amount of investment, minimum is not in there, right? So obviously, if you raise $2 million at X value and you have to sell $100,000, you don't want the whole $2.1 million come back down. But and there are variations. But that's the biggest concern I see with certain investors, that they want to protect their investment on the downside. And it can create an ever-evolving series of dilution that's disastrous. And obviously, especially in the industry, life science, I always say it's a curse being in life sciences, because the more successful you are, the more cash you need, right? So the best thing is you fail in phase 1, you don't need as much cash, right? You fail in phase 3, or 2, or you're successful, in phase 2 or 3, you need a lot of money, right? And people know that. That's why you see in the public equity markets, a lot of companies go for financing, and I as an investor myself, when they have successful trials, there's going to be a diluted round of financing in the public markets. Not to the extent of the original investment, but there's going to be money needed, and the investors know that. If you need, $100 million to further a trial, you're going to need capital. So, you have to be careful in who you sell your capital to. A lot of times, some of the people in the audience probably know it's not. You really need to be careful. And again, everybody's your friend. Trying to do a transaction, And then when you want a waiver or you know, want something like that, it's costly. It's costly. I mean, people say, well, he's my friend and all of a sudden I always say to people, when it comes to money, they're really, friendship seems to go on the other side of the equation.
And you want to make sure you get everything, the bones and the framework and the term sheet. Because if you're in a definitive agreement and you're talking to some friend at a cocktail party who gives you a new idea and you bring that back.
It's too late. No. I think that's my opinion. You, from an equity point of view, is there anything that you
I guess I would just say something that when, you know, it's important to spell out how much equity is going to be, you know, available for a grant. I mean, maybe that's, you know, sort of obvious, but I think it's also important to spell out exactly, you know, how it's useful to spell out the form of the equity as well, because, you know, I mean, as we talked about, a stock option is very different from a share of restricted stock. I mean, for example, in most, unless you specify otherwise, in most companies, restricted stock, even before it's vested, has the right to dividends and voting rights. I mean, you probably you may not want a lot of, like, you know, people below management to really have a lot of say in, you know, and voting rights and get the same kind of disclosures that you know, the investors have.
But that goes back to also, you know, providing for enough equity grants going forward. I mean, there's certain restrictions you have. You go to the VC fund or something, I think they're going to restrict you on incursion of debt, you know, how much equity you can give out, and, you know, certain other things. And, you know, you want to make sure that you really thought it through, because right now, you know, okay, I'll take, you know, it's fine. We have to go back to, I'm sure you'll let us issue some more equity to this guy. And you know, you're somebody may not waive those provisions, saying, well, you know what? We want management to have 5%, you know, and if you're going to give out 10% more, it's got to come out of your piece, not out of ours. So, you know, generally, they're not your partners. You know, and that's okay. You know, I talk to people a lot of times, they're dealing with investment bankers, and God, these guys are the worst, they want so much, and they're just like you are, they're in business, right? And, you know, the alternatives, you don't do a deal with them. A lot of times you don't have a choice, right? So it's a matter of what you can negotiate for as hard as you can. But, you know, it should never be taken personally. Everybody's out there, you know, they have their own investors, right? Since you have investors, and they need to make a profit for those guys. So I think that's imperative to try to keep, as in any kind of negotiation, take out the personal. Nobody's out there because they hate you and they're trying to give you a deal because they don't like you. It's because from an economic point of view, it makes the most sense to them. That's how they're going to make money. You know, the more they squeeze you, the more their investors make money.
Yes, I think that's easier said than done. But yeah.
Well, yeah, well, it's easy to cave in, right? So, because it depends again what you have. If your company's worth, you think it's worth 30 million, now you have a little more option than somebody who's, you know, was at a couple of days ago that I was presenting. It's preclinical out of Columbia. It's a single guy, and he's got nothing behind. He's trying to get a deal. You know, I think it's worth 15 to 20 million. He's saying, you know, there's no way he's going to get 15 to 20 million. He's saying, because it's really supply and demand, right? You have a product, your IP, your wherever you are in your trials, and they have capital. So hopefully both people see the symbiotic relationships out, but it's difficult. Any other questions?
Yeah, I apologize for being late. I actually came to this specifically. So here's my question. I work with a lot of early entrepreneurs, and they are very early. They're looking for seed. They're looking for just to get started. In terms of the term sheets, a lot of them are trying to justify salary in terms of employment agreements. And you might have covered this, but I'm just curious. What do you look for to say, okay, that's something that, you know, would be included in the terms, or do you just flat out?
Oh, most of the time there'll be restrictions put on the salaries of these executives. Absolutely. Nobody's putting their money in to pay you for another year or two. They want the money to stay as much as possible in the development of product, research and development. So the argument is, you know, you've got the capital. You know, if the company succeeds, you're going to see a lot more than your X salary is going to provide you. And that's, you know, as a personal investor too, I firmly believe that too. I mean, you want somebody to be able to live, right? You don't want them to have to pump gas on the weekends, right, if they're a research
Now,
company.
what if you have somebody with really track record, which is basically like, this thing's gonna catch on fire?
Yeah, well, my answer to that is, in that case, I'd like them to co-invest with me, and they don't need the salary, okay, by any means. So, I think that's, it's interesting. People always say, well, this guy's got such a great track record, and then you ask, how much is he putting in? Nothing. How much of the equity? He owns a fair amount of equity. He doesn't own, majority or anything, but he doesn't want to put any more equity in. Well, that doesn't sit well with our investors. If you had a financial wherewithal and you're a real believer in this thing, you should somewhat co-invest if you can, if you have financial ability to do it. And you don't need the salary. Okay, that's And I'm always, track record is always interesting to me. You have to figure out when they were at this company. Such and such company sold for $10 billion. He was president during 1997 to 1998. People don't really always do the due diligence they need. They hear the story. Brokers and other people that are trying to sell the securities seem to focus on the good parts of the story, not the bad parts of the story.
So I also have one technical development person who said, well, in my budget, I have money for a technical resource. I'll be that technical resource. What do you think of that kind of arrangement?
Well, are they VP of tech? I don't know, are they actually employed by the company or?
So yes, so they would be qualified. So this is just an early,
Right.
a couple people.
And do they have equity, so significant equity?
They would have, yes, absolutely.
Well, that's the answer again. You have to give somebody a living wage. But no investor, it's very hard. And if you do have another round of investors, they're going to come in and restrict it anyway. A real VC fund's never going to let you pay this guy anything real. There's no reason to. If they believe in it and they have equity, you're not being asked to come in and put money in to pay this guy's salary. It's not. And you see that when you go with what's public venture capital, right? Which is what most life science public offerings are. The development stage companies and no products. They may be in preclinical, phase 1, maybe phase 2. It's venture capital really. The odds of it happening are probably pretty slim. But the people who believe in it, if you believe in it and you want me or an investor to invest, then you've got to take risk rather than ask somebody to pay your salary, because then you're not taking any risk. It doesn't work out, you move on, you made your $500,000 a year, and okay, it didn't work out, it didn't make like $200 million, capital in return. Nobody's going to want to know that, okay? It's the last thing these investors want to know is that their money went not to develop a product, to pay you a salary for a year or two until you ran out of money.
That's a very popular belief. I think there's a perception underlying that when you pay someone or you don't pay someone, the outcomes are the same. And there's a certain amount of sort of misalignment between the investor and the management team, where the management team has sort of generally low morale of this. A lot of friction comes from being underpaid. A lot of friction, a lot of bad decision making comes from sort of that sense of desperation of where we need to exit. So when you have a whole team that's sort of underpaid, you're basically creating a dynamic that may not be optimal in terms of the final outcome. And yeah, I hear you that it's $100,000 saved or $200,000 saved. But actually from the investor standpoint, the ROI is likely to be significantly at risk if the management team itself is sort of chafing on.
Well, I'm not saying pay them $12 an hour, okay? But what I'm saying is you don't pay them,
Pay them in equity instead of cash.
well, no, but they need to live.
People already
No, but
have equity,
people need to
already
pay them
invest.
mortgage payments, stuff like that. I'm not saying pay them, $50,000 a year. But, when you get into the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, which a lot of people want, I disagree. I don't see that. I think that's enough if you're a real believer. You don't need to be, a multi-million-dollar based on salary from a startup. Nobody wants to pay for that. No investor wants to pay for that.
Yeah.
But you're not going to find many people that are willing to do that.
I understand that. I'm familiar with the
Yeah.
popular perception,
Yeah.
but I would argue that that's probably one of the underlying reasons why so many VC-funded companies fail, because there's a lack of investment on the management team side as well.
My sense on that is that it's a difference between founders and management that you hire.
Employees,
in.
yeah.
Founders don't get paid as much as
that's fair.
others. If you recruit in
Yeah.
a management team, you have to pay them.
Right, unless they decide to come for a big equity piece, right? Which is probably not going to happen because founders aren't going to do it. But,
And right now, I think people, highly discount the value of the equity and demand, that they be paid a salary just because there are so many places that they can go to. It's not a tight, market for experienced executives who have been there, done that, have a proven record. You have to pay them.
In its job market, the retentive value of equity is a lot lower than it used to be. So I get the argument that's being made by investors, but the counter argument is that if you have a large team or if you have a team that's largely underpaid, then you run the risk.
Yeah, I can, let me, we've been self-funded to date, and we've done certain things to, position ourselves for doing a Series A round. I put $2 million into our company, and I paid people fair market value for their services, consultants who are ready to come on board. I wanted to advance our technology far enough along so that we do a Series A round, that we can do it at the right amount of money, fund it, get the right amount of capital at the right valuation for the right period of time, because so often I find in early stage, people raise too little at too high a valuation, and then they're back in the market immediately. And the internal dynamic that you're talking about with employees, when you're selling them this dream and you go out and you say, okay, we didn't raise enough money to get over the next hurdle, that's a real challenge. But I've also, some advisors of mine have said, the money that you put in, you should have on your balance sheet as debt. And I said, no, I'm not going to put it, because that'd be the first thing an investor would say, I'm not paying for the past, I'm paying for the future.
Yeah, they're going to cancel.
So we've, we chose to wait as long and to do what we've done to be in a position to raise the right amount of money. And I'm, the team that we have associated with us I'm going to pay them fair market value and equity on top of that to bring it, to start monetizing some of our assets.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think we're out of time. I guess we can end another question or two if people have. But. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.